The vanishing train. The sun was just beginning to set as the 6:45 evening express train pulled away from the station. It was a train like any other, filled with passengers heading home after a long day. Some were tired, eager to rest their eyes for a while others sat with excitement in their eyes, perhaps heading to meet family, go on vacation, or start a new adventure. The train was set to pass through a remote area on its way to the next city. A stretch of track known for its beauty and isolation. Surrounded by mountains and forests, it was a route that provided peace to those who enjoyed the view. But that night, something happened. The train never made it to its destination. Somewhere between the last station and the next, it vanished. There were no signs of a crash, no reports of an accident, no emergency calls from the crew or passengers. It simply disappeared, as if it had never existed. Families of the missing passengers were frantic. For days, they waited for news, hoping that their loved ones would be found. But as time passed, the authorities began to run out of answers. The search teams found nothing, no wreckage, no clues, and no explanation. It was as if the train had been swallowed by the earth itself. Among the families of the missing passengers was Mrs. Jane Thompson, a woman in her early 50s with a strong will and a broken heart. Her only daughter, Emily, had been on that train, and she refused to accept that her daughter was simply gone. She needed answers. Determined to uncover the truth, Jane decided to hire a private investigator. After doing some research, she came across the name Daniel Green, a well-known investigator who had solved many difficult cases over the years. He was known for his sharp mind and relentless pursuit of the truth, no matter how deep he had to dig. When Jane contacted Daniel, he was hesitant at first. He had heard about the missing train and the strange circumstances surrounding it, but something about the case seemed off. Still, when Jane came to his office, her eyes filled with desperation and sorrow, he couldn't say no. He agreed to take the case, even though he knew it would be one of the most challenging of his career. Chapter 1: The Disappearance. Daniel Green was not the kind of man who believed in the supernatural. He was logical, methodical, and always approached his cases with reason and evidence. But as he began to investigate the disappearance of the train, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this case. His first step was to speak to the authorities who had been involved in the initial search. He met with Officer Miller, the head of the police department in the small town closest to where the train had last been seen. Officer Miller was a middle-aged man with a weary look in his eyes, as though the mystery of the missing train had worn him down. "We searched the entire area," Officer Miller explained as he sat across from Daniel in his office. "We had helicopters, search teams, even dogs, but there was no sign of the train or any of the passengers. It's like it just disappeared into thin air. Is there any chance the train could have derailed somewhere out of sight? Daniel asked. We checked every inch of the tracks, Miller replied, shaking his head. There's no sign of a derailment, no damaged rails, nothing. Daniel frowned. This wasn't the first time he had heard about things disappearing in remote areas, but a whole train full of people. That was something else entirely. As Daniel left the police station, he felt the weight of the case growing heavier on his shoulders. He knew he would have to dig deeper if he was going to find any answers. His next stop was to visit the train station where the train had last been seen. Perhaps there was something there that the authorities had missed. Chapter 2: A Quiet Station. The train station was small and quiet, with only a handful of people milling about. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the disappearance of the train had shaken the entire community. Daniel approached the station master, a man named Mr. Harold, who had been working the night the train disappeared. I've been here for 20 years, Mr. Harold said as he leaned against the counter. I've seen all kinds of things, but I've never seen a train vanish like that. Did you notice anything strange that night? Daniel asked. Mr. Harold thought for a moment. No, everything seemed normal. The train left on time, just like it always does. But what? Daniel pressed. There was a man, Mr. Harold continued, lowering his voice. A strange man, dressed all in black. He got on the train at the last minute, just before it left the station. I remember thinking he looked out of place, like he didn't belong. Daniel's curiosity was piqued. Did you see where he went? I didn't, Mr. Harold admitted. He just disappeared into the crowd of passengers. Daniel made a note of the man in black. It wasn't much, but it was something. As he left the station, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. Chapter 3: The Families. Over the next few days, Daniel met with the families of the missing passengers. Each family had their own story, their own pain, but they all shared the same desperate need for answers. He met with Mrs. Thompson again, who showed him a photo of her daughter Emily. She was a bright, young woman with a warm smile, full of life and promise. She was so excited to start her new job, Mrs. Thompson said, tears welling up in her eyes. She called me just before she got on the train. I never thought. Daniel listened as Mrs. Thompson shared her memories of Emily. He knew that the only way to bring closure to the families was to find out what had really happened to their loved ones. As he left Mrs. Thompson's house, He received a call from a man named Tom Williams, whose wife had been on the train. Tom sounded agitated, as though he had something important to share. "I think I know what happened to the train," Tom said when Daniel arrived at his house. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've been doing some research, and I found something disturbing." Tom led Daniel to his study, where he had laid out maps and newspaper clippings. "Look at this," Tom said, pointing to a map of the area where the train had disappeared. "There's a legend about this place. People say it's cursed." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Cursed?" Tom nodded. "It goes back hundreds of years. There have been other disappearances in the area of people, animals, even entire caravans. They say that once you enter this place, you never come back." Daniel was skeptical, but he couldn't ignore the pattern. Could there be some truth to the legend? Was the area really cursed, or was there something else at play? Daniel decided to focus on finding out who this man was. He checked security footage from the station, but there was no sign of the man on any of the cameras. It was as if he had never been there. Feeling frustrated, Daniel decided to visit the last known location of the train, the stretch of track where it had vanished. He hoped that being there in person might give him some insight into what had happened. The area was as remote as he had imagined. Tall trees lined the tracks, and the mountains loomed in the distance. It was quiet, almost too quiet. As Daniel walked along the tracks, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing there. His heart raced as he continued walking, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something, a figure in black, standing just beyond the trees. He called out, but the figure didn't move. When he approached, it vanished into the shadows. Chapter 5: The Hidden Truth. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel began to dig deeper into the history of the area. He visited the local library, searching through old records and newspaper archives. What he found was chilling. There had been other disappearances in the area, just as Tom Williams had said. In the early 1900s, an entire village had vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty houses and unanswered questions. There were stories of strange lights in the sky, mysterious figures appearing and disappearing, and unexplainable events. The deeper Daniel dug, the more disturbing the truth became. The area where the train had disappeared was known to the locals as the Lost Valley. It was a place shrouded in mystery, with a long history of unexplained phenomena. But there was more. Daniel discovered that the man in black was not just a random passenger. He had been seen in the area before years earlier, during another mysterious disappearance. Some believed he was not of this world, that he was a harbinger of doom, appearing just before something terrible happened. Daniel didn't believe in curses or supernatural beings, but he couldn't deny the evidence. The man in black was connected to the disappearances, and he was determined to find out how. Chapter 6: Into the Lost Valley. With every lead pointing back to the mysterious Lost Valley, Daniel knew he had to go there. The valley was deep in the mountains, far from civilization, and the locals avoided it. They spoke of it in whispers, as if even mentioning its name could bring disaster. It was a place of fear and legend, where many had entered, but few had returned. Daniel wasn't easily scared. He had faced danger before, but something about this case unsettled him. There were too many unanswered questions, too many strange occurrences. Nevertheless, he packed his bag, brought a flashlight, a notebook, and a camera, and set out toward the valley. The journey to the Lost Valley was long and exhausting. Daniel drove as far as he could, but eventually, he had to leave his car behind and continue on foot. The terrain became rougher, the trees thicker, and the path less defined. The deeper he went, the darker it became, as though the trees themselves were trying to hide the valley from the world. As he neared the valley, a thick fog began to rise, curling through the trees like ghostly fingers. Daniel felt the air grow colder, and an eerie silence fell over the forest. There were no birds, no animals, and nothing but the sound of his own footsteps and the occasional rustling of leaves. He could feel eyes on him, as though something was watching him from the shadows. Suddenly, the path opened up, and Daniel found himself standing at the edge of the Lost Valley. It was vast and quiet, with towering cliffs on either side and a river running through the center. The train tracks ran along the valley floor, disappearing into the distance. He carefully made his way down into the valley, his heart pounding. The tracks looked untouched, as if the train had never been there. He followed them, hoping to find some clue, some trace of what had happened. But the more he walked, the stranger things became. As he moved deeper into the valley, Daniel noticed something odd. The tracks seemed to change. At first, they were ordinary, but soon they appeared older, rusted, and worn, as though they had been abandoned for years. The trees around him looked ancient, twisted in strange, unnatural shapes. The air felt heavy, thick with an unexplainable energy. Then, without warning, he heard the faint sound of a train whistle in the distance.